Zara walked into Talia's office holding two newspapers like they were evidence at a crime scene.
Not one. Two.
And the look on Zara's face, tight lips, wide eyes, the kind of expression that said I don't know how to hand you this, made Talia put down her coffee before she even reached for them. Both came out this morning, Zara said, voice low.
Same day. Same announcement.
Different papers.
Talia took the first one.
Memphis Courier, front page. The headline was bold.
Blunt.
Almost arrogant in the way it sat there. John Sungmin of the John Syndicate announces intention to court and marry Talia Cross. Talia stared at it.
Read it again.
Then read it a third time because clearly something was wrong with her eyes.
She picked up the second paper.
Tennessee Underground Gazette, also front page. Ryu Daewon of the Ryu Empire declares his right to claim Talia Cross as his bride. The office went quiet. Not the regular kind of quiet where nothing was happening.
The heavy kind.
The kind that presses down on your shoulders. Zara was still standing there.
Waiting.
Talia set both papers flat on the desk and looked at them side by side like they were a puzzle she hadn't agreed to solve.
They published this, she said. Not a question. Both of them, Zara confirmed. At the same time.
My cousin called me this morning because she thought I'd want to know before you saw it yourself. By the time I got here, it was already everywhere. Talia leaned back in her chair. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't panicking. That alone probably would have surprised anyone who knew her. A regular woman, 31 years old, running a quiet consulting firm in Knoxville, Tennessee, no criminal record, no known ties to anything that rhymed with syndicate or empire. But Talia Cross had known something like this was coming. She just hadn't known it would be this loud.
Clear my calendar, she said. Already done. And Zara? Yes.
Don't talk to anyone about this. Zara nodded quickly and left, pulling the door shut behind her like she was trying not to disturb something dangerous. Talia picked up the first paper again.
John Sungmin. She knew that name. Of course she did.
Everybody in Tennessee with half a brain knew that name. The John Syndicate had been running the eastern corridor of the state's underground economy for almost 15 years. Quietly, efficiently, the way a machine runs when it's been built by someone who understood how things actually worked. John Sungmin had taken over from his father at 26.
He was now 40.
People said he never raised his voice. People also said that was the most terrifying thing about him.
She picked up the second paper. Ryu Daewon.
The Ryu Empire was different.
Louder.
More aggressive in how it moved through the western side of the state. Ryu Daewon had built his operation from scratch. No inheritance, no family name behind him, and that fact had made him both impressive and dangerous in equal measure.
He was 37. He smiled often.
People said that was the most terrifying thing about him.
Two different men. Two different styles.
Both of them had just put her name on the front page of a newspaper, like she was territory they were staking a claim on. And here was the thing that nobody outside this room knew yet. They both knew exactly who she was.
Not Talia Cross, the consultant.
Not Talia Cross, the woman who drove a sensible car and paid her taxes and ordered the same sandwich from the same deli on Fridays. They knew she was the daughter of Maxton Cross.
The Maxton Cross.
The man who had quietly built the largest Mafia empire in Tennessee history and then made it disappear so completely that people weren't even sure it had existed. 22 years ago, Maxton Cross had walked away from everything. The network, the money, the power, the alliances, and vanished.
No body. No goodbye. No public collapse. Just gone. And he'd taken Talia with him.
She'd been 9 years old. She remembered the day they left. She remembered her father sitting across from her in a diner somewhere in eastern Tennessee, ordering her a plate of pancakes, and telling her in a very calm voice that they were going to start over somewhere quiet and that she should never tell anyone his real last name. She'd grown up in Kingsport under the name Cross, her mother's maiden name. Her father had died when she was 19.
Natural causes. Quietly.
In a small house with no neighbors close enough to notice. And he'd left her everything.
Not money. Not a house. Not a car. A key. A ledger. And a name.
The ledger had taken her 3 years to fully decode. By the time she was 25, she understood what her father had actually left behind. The Cross Empire hadn't disappeared. It had just been folded up like a piece of paper and stored somewhere safe.
Stored with her.
She had spent the last 6 years watching, learning the landscape, understanding which pieces still existed, which alliances still held, which people still remembered the name Maxton Cross and what it meant.
She hadn't touched anything, hadn't moved anything. She just watched. And apparently, she hadn't watched quietly enough. Because somehow, both Jeon Sung-min and Ryu Dae-hwan had figured out who she was. And instead of approaching her privately, instead of being subtle about it, they had both gone straight to the newspapers on the same morning like they were trying to outshout each other. Which told her something important. They weren't just after her. They were after each other. SHE was the weapon they each wanted to use. Marrying her, or controlling her, would mean inheriting the Cross legacy. The networks. The loyalty of every person who had ever worked under her father. The silence of every operation that had run beneath the surface of Tennessee for 2 decades and never been touched. Whoever married Talia Cross wouldn't just gain a wife. They'd gain an empire. And they'd eliminate their rival in one move. The problem, for both of them, was that they'd made one enormous mistake. They'd assumed Talia didn't know any of this. She stood up from her desk and walked to the window. Knoxville spread out below her, ordinary and loud in the way cities always were during morning hours. People going to work. Cars stacking up at lights. Pigeons making bad decisions on rooftops. She'd built this office from nothing. Finished her business degree, started small, worked hard, kept her head down. The consulting firm was real. The work was real. She wasn't hiding behind it, she genuinely built it because she wanted something of her own, something clean that had nothing to do with her father's world. But her father's world had come looking for her anyway. She thought about the ledger. She thought about the key. She thought about the name her father had whispered to her once, near the end, when he'd gotten sick and the medication made him more honest than he meant to be. "You're not just my daughter," he'd said. "You're the whole thing. Everything I built, it was always meant to be yours. I just didn't want it to be." She turned away from the window. Both men thought they were playing a game she didn't know the rules to. But she'd been studying those rules since she was 22 years old. She knew every piece on the board. She knew where the traps were. She knew which alliances were real and which ones were performances. She even knew things about the Jeon Syndicate and the Ryu Empire that they probably didn't know about themselves, because her father's ledger had recorded things that dated back further than either of their operations. So, 2 men. Both Korean. Both powerful. Both dangerous. Both pretending this was about her when it was really about each other. And both of them had just made themselves very, very visible. She picked up her phone and called a number she'd only used twice before. It rang 3 times. Talia. The voice on the other end was old but steady. Delmira Vaughn. One of 2 people still alive who had worked directly under Maxton Cross and who knew Talia's real position. "Did you see the papers?" A pause. "Then, I saw them." Both of them made a move at the same time. "That's not a coincidence." "No," Delmira said, "it's not. Someone told them to do it simultaneously. Whoever gave them the information was playing both sides." Talia filed that away. Someone had leaked her identity to both men at the same time. That meant there was a third party involved. Someone who wanted the 2 bosses competing against each other, and who probably wanted Talia in the middle of the chaos. "I'm going to need everything we have on Jeon Sung-min and Ryu Dae-hwan," Talia said. "I can have it to you by tomorrow." "Tonight." Another pause. "Then, tonight then." Talia ended the call and sat back down at her desk. She wasn't angry. She wasn't scared. She was thinking, the way she always thought, slowly and completely, turning a problem over until she could see every side of it. Both men were going to contact her. Probably today. They'd send someone polite and formal, the way powerful men always did when they were pretending to be gentlemen. They'd offer protection. They'd offer partnership. They'd use whatever language sounded most appealing and see which version she responded to. They were going to perform. And she was going to let them. Because the only way to understand what both men were really capable of, the only way to know whether either of them was worth a single moment of her time, was to let them show her who they actually were when they thought they had something to gain. She pulled out a notepad and wrote 2 words at the top. The test. She didn't know yet exactly what shape it would take. But she knew what she was looking for. She needed to see, clearly and without question, whether either of these men was capable of choosing her over the empire they were really after. She already suspected she knew the answer. But she was her father's daughter.
And her father had never moved on suspicion alone. She would wait for proof.
The phone on her desk rang.
Zara's voice came through, careful and quiet. "There's a man downstairs, ma'am. Says he's a representative of the John Syndicate. He'd like to request a meeting on behalf of Mr. John Sungmin." Talia looked at the 2 newspapers still sitting on her desk.
"Then send him up."
If you've ever watched a woman figure out exactly what kind of man she's dealing with before he even opens his mouth, comment below and tell me what you think she's about to do. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button because this story is only getting started. The man John Sungmin sent was named Hyan. No last name offered.
Just Hyan.
Neat suit, careful posture, the kind of stillness that came from years of training himself not to react to anything. He sat across from Talia with a small envelope on his knee and waited until she nodded before he spoke. "Mr. John sends his deepest respect," Hyan said. "He is aware that this morning's announcement may have come as a surprise. He wants you to know that his intentions are entirely honorable." Talia looked at the envelope. "What's that?"
"An invitation. A private dinner.
"Just the 2 of you.
No staff, no business talk.
Mr. John wants to meet you properly." She didn't reach for it immediately.
She let it sit there.
And the newspaper announcement? That was his idea of honorable. Hyan's expression didn't shift, but something behind his eyes did. Just slightly. Mr. John felt a public declaration was the most respectful way to announce his intentions.
Talia almost smiled. Almost.
"Tell Mr. John I'll consider the invitation," she said. Hyan stood, placed the envelope on her desk, and left. 20 minutes later, Zara knocked again. Another representative downstairs. "This one is from the Ryu Empire."
"Of course."
This man's name was Colby, black American, broad-shouldered, a little more relaxed in how he sat, which probably meant Ryu Daehwan ran a looser operation. He didn't bring an envelope. He pulled out his phone and turned the screen to face her. A message typed in clean, simple text.
"Miss Cross.
I'd like to take you to lunch.
Somewhere public.
Somewhere you feel safe. Name the place and I'll be there.
Daehwan." Talia read it twice.
Smarter than the dinner invitation.
More calculated.
The "somewhere you feel safe" line was doing a lot of work. It was designed to make him seem considerate. The fact that he used his first name only was designed to make him seem warm. She typed her response directly into Colby's phone. "I'll be in touch." Colby nodded once and left. Talia sat alone in her office for a long moment. Both men had moved within the same hour. She hadn't even needed to confirm that they were watching each other. The timing did that on its own. The second John's representative walked out of the building, Ryu's representative walked in. Somebody was coordinating the timing, or both operations had people watching her front door.
Probably both.
She opened her notepad and drew a line down the center of the page. On one side she wrote John. On the other, Ryu. Then she wrote one question underneath both names. What would you give up to protect her?
That was the test.
In its simplest form, that was all it was.
Not a trick.
Not a trap designed to embarrass anyone. Just a clear, honest question, dressed up in real situations, forced into moments where the answer couldn't be faked. She picked up her phone and called Delmira. "The package you're sending tonight," Talia said. "Include everything you know about what both men stand to lose if their organizations were publicly connected to each other."
Delmira paused.
"You're going to use their rivalry as part of the test." "I'm going to use everything."
The first test was simple.
Talia agreed to John Sungmin's dinner, but she changed the location. Instead of the private restaurant he'd chosen, she named a small family-owned Korean restaurant in East Knoxville called Hanul Table.
Tiny place. 12 tables.
Owned by a woman named Bomi Kwan who had been running it for 20 years and who, according to Talia's research, had once given a small loan to Maxton Cross before he disappeared. Bomi didn't know about the connection. But the location meant something to Talia. She wanted to see how John Sungmin handled a place that wasn't chosen to impress him.
He arrived first.
She'd expected that. Men like him always arrived first when they wanted to appear in control. He was taller than she'd imagined. Composed in the way that felt rehearsed rather than natural.
Gray suit, no tie.
He stood when she walked in, which she noted but didn't react to.
They sat. They ordered.
And for the first 15 minutes, John Sungmin was exactly what she'd expected. Polished, warm in a careful way, asking her questions about her work that showed he'd done research without wanting to admit it. Then she introduced the first test. "I have a colleague," Talia said, setting down her chopsticks.
A woman named Soren.
She runs a small import business in Chattanooga. She came to me recently with a problem. Someone has been putting pressure on her suppliers, pushing her out of contracts she's held for years. She thinks it's organized, but she can't prove it.
John Sungmin listened. His face stayed calm.
"I can't figure out who's behind it," Talia continued. "But whoever it is has connections I don't have access to. I was hoping someone like you might know something."
A pause. Brief. But she caught it.
"I'm not sure I'd have information about something like that," he said carefully.
"Really?" Talia tilted her head.
"Because Soren's biggest supplier is a distribution company that operates out of Chattanooga. The same distribution network that the John Syndicate's import operations ran through 5 years ago, according to public business records." The temperature at the table changed. It didn't shift dramatically. John Sungmin was too controlled for that. But his hand, resting on the table, moved.
Just slightly. A small adjustment. A tell.
"I divested from those networks years ago," he said.
"I know," Talia said.
"But you still know who runs them." He looked at her for a moment, really looked at her, like he was recalculating something. "I can ask some questions," he said finally. "That would mean a lot to me," Talia said. And she smiled, and picked up her chopsticks again, and moved the conversation somewhere lighter. She already knew the truth about Soren's supplier problem. She'd solved it herself 3 weeks ago through one carefully placed phone call. But she needed to see what John Sungmin would do with the information she'd given him, whether he'd use it to help, or whether he'd use it to position himself. She found out 4 days later. One of Delmara's contacts reported that John had quietly acquired a 40% stake in Soren's supplier network.
He hadn't fixed the problem. He'd absorbed it.
Turned Soren's crisis into an opportunity for himself, and now he was one of the people Soren's business depended on.
Talia wrote it down. Test 1.
John chose acquisition over solution. Ryu Daehwan chose lunch at a diner on the edge of downtown Knoxville. His choice, not hers. He'd asked her to name a place and she'd said you pick, somewhere ordinary, and he'd chosen a booth-and-counter diner called Patsy's that had been open since 1987 and smelled like coffee and griddle grease. He was already there when she arrived. Sitting in a corner booth, no bodyguards visible, coffee in front of him. He was wearing a regular jacket, dark jeans. When she walked in he didn't stand up, he just raised his coffee cup slightly, like a casual greeting.
She sat across from him. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said.
"I wasn't sure either," she answered honestly.
He smiled.
It was, she had to admit, a genuinely warm smile.
Not performed.
Not measured. The kind of smile that arrived before the person could decide whether it was a good idea.
She ordered coffee. They talked.
He was funny, which she hadn't expected. Self-deprecating in a specific way that came across as genuine rather than strategic. He asked her about her consulting firm and actually seemed interested in the logistics of how she'd built the client base. Then she ran the same test. Different packaging. "I have a friend in Murfreesboro," she said.
Ziola.
She owns a print shop, small, independent. Someone's been blocking her permit renewals at the city level. She's been waiting 8 months. I think someone with better connections than me could probably make one call and sort it out. Ryu Daehwan leaned back. "What kind of print shop?"
"Commercial."
"She does event programs, business materials. Nothing exciting."
He nodded slowly.
"What's the permit for?"
"Expansion."
"She wants to add a second floor to her space. The reviews keep getting delayed, no reason given, just delayed." "You want me to look into it?" "I want to know if you'd want to."
He looked at her steadily. "Then yeah.
"I'd want to. Give me the address and I'll have someone check the block on Monday." She gave him a business card with a Murfreesboro address on it, one she'd prepared specifically for this. Not Ziola's real address.
A test address.
She found out what happened 6 days later. The permit block was cleared. She confirmed that through a contact at the city office. But the address she'd given him wasn't Ziola's actual business. It was a vacant commercial unit that Ryu had apparently just signed a lease on. He'd cleared the permit delay all right.
For himself.
He now controlled the space she'd pointed him toward. She looked at Delmira across her kitchen table. He cleared the block and then acquired the property. Delmira didn't look surprised. Power moves dressed as favors.
Both of them, Talia said. Same instinct.
Different methods. She added it to the notepad.
Test 1.
RYU cleared the obstacle, claimed the resource. Neither of them had actually helped anyone. They'd helped themselves, using the information she gave them as material for their own expansion. And they'd both done it while still maintaining the appearance of doing her a favor. Which meant both men believed she wasn't watching closely enough to notice. That was the real answer. Not what they did, but what they assumed about her. The second test was harder. Talia arranged it so that both men received information, separately through different channels, that someone was threatening her safety.
Not a real threat.
A constructed one, detailed enough to feel real, vague enough that it required them to make a choice about how to respond. She wanted to see if either of them would consult her.
Tell her what they'd heard.
Let her make decisions about her own safety. Or if they'd just handle it without asking her. Move around her. Treat her safety like a piece of territory to be managed instead of a person to be respected. John Sungmin had his people increase surveillance on her building within 48 hours. She spotted them, a rotating pair of vehicles on her street, too clean to be ordinary traffic.
He didn't call her. Didn't mention it.
Just quietly installed himself as her protector without her knowledge or consent. Ryu Daehwan reached out to one of her known contacts, Zara actually, which was bold, and asked if Talia had mentioned feeling unsafe recently. Zara, under Talia's instructions, said no. Daehwan then privately hired someone to look into the supposed threat and within 5 days had a report on her daily movements. He didn't tell Talia about any of this. She found out because the person he hired to surveil her was someone Delmira knew.
Test 2.
Both of them, surveillance without consent. Management without conversation. Neither man had called her to say I heard something, are you okay? Neither man had treated her like someone who got to decide what happened to her own life. They'd both moved around her like she was an asset they were already responsible for, before she'd agreed to anything. Like the marriage was already settled in their heads and they were just waiting for the paperwork. She sat with that for a long time. Then she wrote underneath both columns. They're not competing for you. They're competing for what you represent. You're not the goal. You're the vehicle. She called them both on the same morning.
John first.
I've been thinking about your dinner invitation, she said. I'd like to meet again. This time, I want to have an honest conversation about why you're really interested in me.
A careful pause.
Then, I look forward to that.
Ryu second.
I think it's time we stop pretending, she said, that this is about anything other than what it actually is.
A shorter pause.
Then, name the time and place. She told them both the same location.
The same time.
A conference room she rented on the top floor of a building in downtown Knoxville.
Neutral territory. Professional.
No ambience designed to make anyone comfortable.
She arrived first.
Set up 2 chairs on the opposite side of a long table from where she would sit. Put both newspapers on the table, the ones Zara had brought her weeks ago, face up.
And waited.
They arrived within 4 minutes of each other, and the moment they walked through the door and saw each other, the room filled with a kind of tension that had nothing to do with her. They barely looked at her at first. They were too busy reading each other. The way men who have been rivals for years do, measuring, calculating, adjusting. She let them do it. Then she said, clearly and calmly,
sit down. They both sat.
She looked at them, really looked, taking her time, and then she said, I know why you're here. Not the version you've been performing. The real version. Neither of them spoke. You both found out who my father was, she continued. And you both decided that marrying me was the fastest way to absorb whatever's left of his legacy and remove the other person from this table. She tapped the newspapers. You just didn't expect to have to share a room while admitting it. John Sungmin's expression was still controlled, but his jaw shifted. The tiniest movement. Ryu Daehwan looked at the table for a moment. Then back at her. I know about the surveillance, Talia said.
Both sets.
I know about the property acquisitions. I know about the approach to my assistant.
She paused.
You both came here wearing the mask of men who wanted to protect me. But every choice you made when you thought I wasn't watching told me something else entirely."
The room was very quiet.
She folded her hands on the table. "I'm going to give each of you one chance to tell me the truth."
Not the performance. The truth. She looked at John.
Then at Ryu. "Because I already know it. I just want to see if either of you is willing to say it out loud." The silence stretched. And then slowly, Ryu Daehwon exhaled. Set his hands flat on the table.
"You're right," he said.
John Sungmin said nothing. Talia looked at both of them for a long moment.
And then she said, "Good.
Because now we can talk about what happens next. And I promise you, neither of you is going to see it coming." If you're shocked by what Talia just did, comment Talia in the comments. And don't go anywhere because next scene is about to completely flip this story on its head. Neither man had expected her to already know everything. That was the thing about people who underestimated a quiet woman. They always assumed the quiet meant empty. That stillness was the same as ignorance. That a woman who smiled and ordered coffee and asked careful questions was just being polite. Talia had never been just polite. She let the silence sit for another full minute after Ryu Daewon's admission. Let it press down on both men until it became uncomfortable enough that even John Sungmin, controlled, measured, never rattled, shifted his weight in his chair. Then she opened the folder in front of her. Not dramatically. Not slowly for effect. Just opened it the way you open something you've read so many times the pages fall where they're supposed to. "My father built something that neither of your organizations could have constructed in 3 lifetimes," she said. "Not because he was smarter than everyone else, though he was, but because he understood one thing you both seem to have missed."
She looked up.
"He understood that the most powerful position is the one nobody knows you're standing in." John Sungmin's eyes moved to the folder. Controlled curiosity. He wanted to know what was in it, but wasn't going to ask. Ryu Daehwon leaned forward slightly. Less controlled. More honest about his reaction. "My father's empire didn't disappear," Talia continued. "I know that's what people believed. I know that's probably what whoever told you about me also believed."
She paused.
"It didn't disappear.
It went quiet.
There's a difference. And for 22 years, it has been sitting exactly where he left it, maintained by people who were loyal to him and who transferred that loyalty, when he passed, to me."
She let that land. John's jaw moved. That small tell again.
Ryu said nothing, but his eyes changed. The warmth that had been there before, the easy confidence, recalibrated into something sharper. "You've been running this," John said finally.
Not a question.
The word running landed carefully, like he was testing how much weight it would hold.
"For 6 years, Talia said.
Quietly. "The way my father taught me."
She closed the folder.
"While both of you were fighting over the western and eastern corridors of Tennessee, the network underneath both of your operations has been mine. The distribution contacts your suppliers use, mine. The 3 silent partners who fund the largest import routes through Memphis, mine. The information broker both of your organizations have been using to track each other's movements for the past 4 years." She paused. "Also mine."
The room tilted. She could feel it.
Ryu sat back slowly. Something crossed his face that she didn't have a word for. Not quite respect, not quite fear, somewhere uncomfortable between both. John Sungmin was very still.
"Tevita," he said quietly. Talia looked at him. "Excuse me."
"The information broker. His name is Tevita." John's voice was measured. "We've used him for years. We assumed he was independent."
"He is independent," Talia said.
"He's also been reporting to me since the beginning. Every piece of intelligence your 2 organizations exchanged through him, every move you made that you thought the other side didn't know about, I knew about it first." This time, neither man spoke. She understood what was happening in their heads. They were rewinding. Going back through every decision they'd made in the past few years that they thought had been clever, that they thought had been protected, and seeing it from a different angle. Seeing the ceiling they hadn't known was a window. It was a disorienting feeling. She knew, because she'd felt it herself once, the moment she'd understood from her father's ledger that things she thought were solid were actually transparent. She didn't enjoy doing this to them. But she needed them to understand the full shape of what had happened before she said the next part. "You both came to me," she said, "because you believed that marrying me would hand you my father's legacy. That I was the door and you just needed to be the one holding the key."
She stood up. But here's what neither of you considered. She walked to the window, then turned back to face them. I'm not the door. My father's empire doesn't transfer through marriage. It doesn't transfer through any kind of claiming or winning or acquisition. She let her voice stay even. It transfers through trust. And trust is something neither of you has come close to earning. Ryu Daehwan exhaled, a long, slow breath, like he was releasing something he'd been holding for weeks. John Sungmin looked at the table. The tests, Ryu said. Not accusing. More like someone working out a math problem out loud. The friend with the supplier problem. The permit issue. Yes, Talia said. You already knew the answers. I already knew the answers before I asked the questions. He nodded slowly. And we both chose the resource, she said. Every time. Not the person. The resource. John spoke then, his voice still controlled, but something underneath it had shifted, something that sounded almost like the bones of the performance cracking. What was the surveillance test designed to show you? Whether either of you would treat my safety as mine to manage. Or whether you'd move around me like I was already property. Silence. You already know the answer to that too, he said. I do. She hadn't planned to tell them about the third thing. The thing that went deeper than tests and property acquisitions and surveillance teams. But she'd thought about it for weeks and she decided that the truth, the whole truth, was the only thing that would make this conversation mean anything. So she sat back down and she said, there's something else. Something neither of you knows. About the person who gave you my identity. Both men focused. You both received information about me at the same time, she said. Same day. You assumed it was a coincidence, or that you'd separately discovered the same thing. But it wasn't a coincidence. She opened the folder again to the second page. Someone gave you both my name on purpose. The same person. And that person is connected to both of your organizations. John Sungmin went very still. Ryu Daehwan said, who? Not a question. A demand, but a quiet one. His name is Brennan Yu, Talia said. He sits on the outer council of the John Syndicate. He has also, for the past 3 years, been quietly feeding operational intelligence to the Ryu Empire. He's been working both sides. She paused. He found out about me through Tevita, not because Tevita told him, but because he got access to one of Tevita's secondary files through a contact I hadn't known was compromised. He gave both of you my name because he wanted you competing. 2 bosses locked in a marriage war over the Cross legacy means neither of you is paying attention to what he's been building on the side. The silence that followed was different from the others. Heavier. It had edges. John said, very quietly, Brennan. Yes. He's been with my organization for 9 years. I know. He's also been skimming from your Eastern distribution revenue for 2 of those years. The amount is in the folder. She slid it across the table toward him. The documentation for his double work with the Ryu Empire is on the page behind it. John reached for the folder with the particular stillness of someone who was very, very angry and was choosing not to show it. He opened it. Read. His expression didn't change. But the quality of his stillness changed. It went from controlled to frozen. Ryu Daehwan looked at the table. He came to me as a contact 3 years ago. Said he was unhappy with how the syndicate was being run. I thought I was getting intelligence. I was getting played. You were both getting played, Talia said. By a man who understood that the best way to protect himself was to keep the 2 most powerful people in Tennessee underground focused on each other instead of on him. She let them sit with that. Then she said, he's also the one who planted the false threat to my safety. The one you both responded to with surveillance. He wanted to see which of you would move faster. He was using your responses to gauge how serious you were about the marriage plan, which would tell him how long he had before one of you succeeded and started paying closer attention to internal operations. Ryu looked up at her. He's been using us as a clock. Yes. And you let him keep running. You knew about him and you didn't. I needed to see what both of you would do first, she said simply. I couldn't dismantle what Brennan you had built until I understood the full landscape. Including what you both were willing to do. She paused. Now I understand it. She reached into the folder one more time and pulled out 2 separate envelopes. Placed one in front of John. One in front of Ryu.
Those contain formal documentation, she said. Financial records. Communication logs. Operational records. Everything Brennan, you has done across both organizations.
She sat back.
That's yours to handle as you see fit. John picked up his envelope. Ryu didn't touch his yet. He was looking at her.
That's not all that's in them, he said. She met his eyes. No. What else? She folded her hands.
There are also documents from my father's original network. Records that outline how certain supply routes currently used by both organizations were originally built on infrastructure my father created. Routes that legally, through a chain of company registrations I've been quietly maintaining, still belong to the Cross estate.
Another silence.
This one with a very different texture. You own part of our operations, John said. I own the foundation a significant part of your operations is built on, she corrected. I haven't exercised those ownership rights. I've let both of you operate as if the ground beneath you was yours.
She paused. It was a choice. Not an oversight.
Ryu exhaled again. That long, slow breath. You've had the power to dismantle both of us for years.
Yes. And you didn't. No. Why?
She thought about how to answer that. Not because she didn't know, but because she wanted to say it precisely. Because my father didn't build what he built so that I could use it as a weapon. He built it and then stepped away from it because he understood that power used constantly corrodes the person holding it. He wanted me to have it as protection, not as a tool for control.
She looked at both of them. But you came to my door, she said.
You put my name in the newspaper. You put surveillance on my building. You competed over me like I was a trophy in a competition I never agreed to enter. You made me the center of your war. Her voice stayed even, but the weight behind it increased. So now I'm going to use what I have. Not to hurt you, but to yendi this. John set the envelope down. What does that mean? It means, Talia said, that I have already begun the process of formally reclaiming the infrastructure my father built. The documentation is filed.
The legal work is done.
It's not a threat, it's already happened. She let that sit for just a moment. When those routes revert to the Cross estate's legal ownership, both of your organizations lose access to the supply lines that make approximately 40% of your respective operations functional.
Ryu stared at her. John was very still. You have options, she continued.
You can fight it legally, but the chain of ownership is airtight and the filings predate both of your organizations by years. You can try to build alternative routes, but that takes time, money, and the kind of stability that's hard to maintain when your internal infrastructure is compromised by someone like Brennan you.
She paused. Or. Both men waited.
Or, she said, you can choose to restructure.
Not merge.
Not consolidate under either of your names. Restructure, legitimately, with legal frameworks, into operations that don't depend on underground infrastructure. The kind of restructuring that my father always believed was possible and never lived long enough to pursue. The room was so quiet she could hear the building's ventilation system running. You're offering us an exit, Ryu said slowly. I'm offering you a direction, she said. What you do with it is your own choice. John looked at her for a long time. The performance was fully gone now. What was underneath it wasn't what she'd expected. It wasn't coldness or calculation. It was something more complicated. Something that looked almost like the expression of a man who had just understood that he had been moving through a maze that someone else had designed and that the exit had been visible the whole time, if he'd been looking. You're not what I thought you were, he said.
No, she agreed. I'm not.
Ryu said, your father would have, and then stopped himself.
Would have what? She asked. A beat.
Then, I was going to say he would have been proud of you. But I realize I don't have the right to say that. I never knew him. She looked at Ryu Daehwan for a moment. It was the most honest thing either man had said since they walked into the room.
He would have been terrified, she said quietly.
He built everything he built because he was afraid of exactly this kind of world. And then he left it to me anyway because he knew I was the only one who understood it well enough to handle it.
She stood up.
Which is exactly what I'm doing. She gathered her folder. The documentation in those envelopes will take approximately 2 weeks to fully process through the legal channels. During that time, I'd recommend both of you spend less energy on each other and more on what's happening inside your own houses.
She glanced at John. Start with Brennan, you. She picked up her bag. I'll see myself out.
She was almost at the door when Ryu spoke.
Talia. She stopped.
Didn't turn around immediately. Was there any version of this, he said, where one of us could have passed your test?
She thought about that.
Genuinely. Stood there at the door of the conference room and let herself actually consider it. Then she turned, just partially enough to answer. If either of you had picked up the phone, she said, and called me to say I heard something that might put you in danger and I thought you should know, just that.
Nothing else.
No action, no surveillance, no acquisition. Just a phone call treating me like a person instead of a position to be protected.
She paused.
That would have been something. She opened the door. But neither of you made that call.
And she walked out.
Comment right now if Talia just became your favorite character in any story you've watched this year. Don't forget to like and subscribe, because what happens next is the ending nobody is going to be ready for.
They came anyway.
That was the thing about men who had spent their entire lives being the most powerful person in every room. They didn't know how to stay home when they'd been dismissed. It wasn't arrogance, exactly. It was more like a reflex. A deep, structural inability to accept that a conversation was over when they hadn't been the one to end it. Talia had expected it. She was in her office when Zara knocked, not the careful knock from weeks ago, but a faster one, 2 sharp raps that meant something is happening and I need you to know. Both of them, Zara said when Talia opened the door.
Downstairs. Together.
They're asking to see you.
Together. That was new. She took a breath.
Straightened her jacket. Picked up the one folder she'd kept separate from everything she'd handed them in the conference room. The last piece, the one she hadn't shown anyone yet.
Send them up, she said.
They walked in side by side, which probably would have surprised anyone who'd been following their rivalry for the past 15 years. John Sungmin and Ryu Dae-hwan, in the same room again, not performing hostility at each other. Not comfortable, that would have been too much to expect, but aligned in the specific way that two people become aligned when something larger than their conflict has made itself known. Talia was standing when they entered. She didn't sit first this time. You dealt with Brennan, she said. Not a question, she already knew. Delmira had confirmed it that morning. He's no longer a problem, John said. She didn't ask for details. It wasn't her business and she hadn't asked for that outcome specifically. She'd simply handed them the documentation and let them decide. Whatever had happened, it was inside their world, not hers. Then what are you here for? She asked. Ryu and John looked at each other briefly. Just a glance, the kind that meant they'd talked before coming here and had agreed on something.
Ryu spoke first.
We wanted to tell you directly that we're withdrawing the announcements.
Both of them, John added.
We've already contacted the papers. Formal retractions will run this week.
Talia studied them. That's it. No, Ryu said.
That's the first part. He reached into his jacket and set something on her desk.
A single sheet of paper, folded once. She picked it up and opened it. It was a letter. Handwritten, which surprised her. Short. It said,
You were right about everything. We were never competing for you. We were competing for what we believed you represented. That was wrong, not just strategically, but as a basic matter of how one person should treat another. We are not asking for anything. We just didn't want to leave without saying that clearly. Both their signatures at the bottom.
She read it twice. Folded it.
She wasn't going to perform being moved by it. She wasn't going to tell them it was enough, because it wasn't. An apology on paper didn't rewind weeks of surveillance and manipulation and the very specific violation of having her name put in newspapers without her knowledge or consent. But it was honest. And after weeks of performance from both of them, honest counted for something.
I appreciate this, she said. Carefully.
Meaning it but not inflating it.
John Sungmin nodded.
Then he said, Can I ask you something?
You can ask.
The restructuring you proposed.
The legal framework. He paused. Is that still on the table?
Or was that only offered in the context of a negotiation that's now over?
Talia looked at him. Why?
Because I've been thinking about it since you left that room, he said. Not as a way to preserve what I currently have.
As something else. He stopped.
Seemed to be choosing words more carefully than she'd heard him do before. I've been in this world since I was 19 years old. I took over my father's organization because it was expected. Because there was nothing else.
A pause. I'm 40.
I'm tired of the thing I built being the only thing I am.
The room was quiet.
She looked at Ryu. He said, I built mine from nothing. I was proud of that.
I still am.
But, he exhaled, I built it in a direction I chose because it was the only direction I could see at the time. You showed me there were other directions. Talia set the letter down. She picked up the last folder, the one she'd kept separate, and opened it on the desk between them. This, she said, is something my father put together in the last 2 years of his life. Not a continuation of what he'd built.
The opposite.
A framework for how the infrastructure he'd created, the distribution networks, the import routes, the financial channels, could be converted.
Made legitimate.
Folded into legal business operations that would be more profitable in the long run than the underground version had ever been.
She looked at them.
He never got to implement it. He ran out of time. Both men looked at the documents. He was planning to dismantle it himself, Ryu said slowly.
Yes. From the inside. Carefully.
Without blowing anything up.
She turned a page.
He called it the clean exit. He believed it was possible. He believed that the people who'd built their lives inside these structures deserved a path out that didn't destroy them. John reached forward slowly and she nodded permission, and he picked up the top page and read it. His eyes moved quickly. Stopped at something halfway down.
Read it again. This is detailed, he said.
He had 2 years and a lot of time to think, she said. Ryu was reading over John's shoulder now, which 3 weeks ago would have been unimaginable. This would take years to implement.
4 to 6, Talia said. Minimum.
Done properly.
And you'd, John looked up.
What's your role in this? If we agreed to pursue it. I'd oversee the infrastructure conversion. My father's network is the foundation. I control whether those routes operate as underground channels or get folded into legitimate logistics. That part only works with my involvement.
She paused.
But I'm not doing this as a favor. And I'm not doing it to maintain any kind of control over either of your operations. I'm doing it because my father spent 22 years carrying the weight of what he built and it killed him slowly, and I don't intend to spend the next 22 years doing the same thing.
She closed the folder. I want it done, she said. Clean. Legal. Finished.
That's my interest in this.
Silence.
Then Ryu Daehwon said, I'm in.
John took a breath. Set the page down. I'm in.
Talia looked at both of them. She'd imagined this moment in different versions over the past 6 years. In some versions it had felt like victory. In some it had felt like justice. She'd expected it to feel large, significant in the way that things you've worked toward for years feel when they finally arrive. It felt quieter than that.
Not smaller. Just quieter. Real.
Like something settling into place rather than something exploding. We'll start with a legal consultation, she said. I have an attorney who's been briefed on the framework. She'll need full financial disclosure from both organizations, not summaries, not edited versions.
Full disclosure.
If either of you withholds anything that comes out later, the whole thing stops. She looked at them both steadily.
I mean that. Understood, John said.
Completely, Ryu said.
Good. She picked up the folder.
I'll have her contact both of you by end of week. She walked to her door and held it open. They were leaving, both of them standing straightening jackets, the particular body language of men who had just agreed to something that was going to require more from them than they'd originally planned, when she said one more thing. Not because it was necessary for the plan. But because it was true, and she'd learned from her father that true things deserved to be said out loud at least once. My father believed that the measure of a person wasn't what they built when things were easy, she said. It was what they were willing to take apart when they understood it was wrong. She looked at both of them. That's what this is.
It's not a defeat. It's a choice. A pause.
Make it like you mean it.
Ryu nodded.
John held her gaze for a moment, and in that moment, with the performance fully gone and nothing left to strategize around, he looked like what he actually was. A tired man making a decision that was going to cost him something real.
We will, he said. And they left.
Talia stood in her office for a long moment after they were gone. She walked to her window.
Knoxville again.
The same view she'd been looking at for years, Ordinary, loud, indifferent to everything happening inside this building.
Pigeons on rooftops. Cars at lights.
People going places. She thought about her father. She thought about a diner in eastern Tennessee.
Pancakes.
A calm voice telling her they were going to start over somewhere quiet. She thought about the key he'd left her.
The ledger. The name.
She thought about how long she'd spent understanding what he'd built and why he'd walked away from it and what he'd actually wanted for her. Not the empire, never the empire, but the option. The ability to decide. The power to choose her own direction rather than have one chosen for her. 2 men had tried to make that choice for her. And instead, she'd used the very thing they tried to claim to make sure it never controlled anyone again. She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out the key her father had left her.
Small.
Ordinary looking. The kind of key that could open almost anything if you knew what it was for. She'd been carrying it for 12 years. She set it on the desk in front of her.
Looked at it.
Then she opened her drawer again and pulled out a small envelope.
Put the key inside. Sealed it.
She picked up her phone and called Delmira.
It's done, she said. A pause.
Then Delmira's voice, softer than usual, all of it.
All of it.
The framework is in motion. The legal process is started. Both organizations are coming in.
She paused.
I need you to file the final piece of the estate documentation. The part that closes the Cross name as an operational entity.
A longer pause. You're sure? I'm sure.
Your father. My father wanted this, Talia said. He just ran out of time. I'm finishing it for him. She picked up the envelope with the key inside.
And then I'm done.
Delmira was quiet for a moment.
Then, he would have been proud.
I know I don't say that enough. Talia closed her eyes briefly.
Thank you, Delmira.
She ended the call. Set the envelope aside to mail later. Picked up her coffee, cold by now, it had been cold for an hour, and drank it anyway because that was just how mornings went sometimes. Then she sat down at her desk, opened her laptop, and pulled up the quarterly report for the consulting firm.
Real work. Her work.
The thing she'd built with her own hands and her own choices that had nothing to do with her father's name or his empire or the war 2 men had been fighting over a legacy that was never theirs to claim.
Her phone buzzed.
A text from Zara. Everything okay up there?
You've been very quiet.
Talia typed back, everything's fine. Can you order from that sandwich place on Fridays? I want the usual. Zara's response was immediate, it's Tuesday.
Talia smiled.
Actually smiled, the kind that arrived before she could decide if it was a good idea.
Then order it on Friday, she typed. I'll still be here. She set the phone down.
Outside, Knoxville kept going.
Pigeons. Cars. People.
Talia Cross opened her quarterly report and got back to work. That was the thing neither man had understood from the beginning, the thing the newspapers hadn't captured in their loud front-page announcements, the thing the surveillance teams watching her building had missed entirely, the thing even Brennan knew with all his careful scheming had never accounted for. She wasn't the daughter of Maxton Cross, the Mafia king. She wasn't the key to an empire.
She wasn't a prize.
She wasn't a weapon. She wasn't a door that opened into someone else's power.
She was Talia.
A woman who drove a sensible car and paid her taxes and ordered the same sandwich from the same deli every Friday and had spent 6 quiet, careful years building something clean and real out of the complicated, heavy thing her father had left behind. She had done what he couldn't. She had walked away. Not running. Not hiding. Just choosing. Deliberately. With her eyes open and her hands steady and full knowledge of exactly what she was leaving behind. And that, in the end, was the only kind of power that had ever mattered. If Talia's story hit different, if you watched this whole thing and felt every twist, drop a comment telling me which moment got you the most. Was it when she revealed she already knew everything? Was it the tests? Was it that final walk out of the room? And if you're not subscribed yet, what are you doing? Hit that button right now because there are more stories like this one coming, and you do not want to miss them.